Gates, this is Atan Thomas, and you're listening to WPFW Washington, your station for jazz and justice.
Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all think you a boy grown up mischief.
Welcome to another episode of Darker Than Blue. Peace and happy Friday, y'all. Yes, this is Darker Than Blue. This is the show where we discuss politics for the people who are, as Curtis Mayfield just described, darker than blue. And I'm your host, Jacqueline Lukman. Welcome to everyone listening right now on WPFW 89.3 FM on the radio, but also welcome to everyone watching on Black Liberation Media on YouTube right now or on Facebook, and to all of the Lukman Nation patrons, everybody in Lukman Nation watching on Patreon right now. That's right, patreon.com/Lukman Nation, LUQMANNATION. Thank y'all so much for joining me today. I'm so happy that you are here. We are still in pledge drive, folks, here at WPFW. I want to thank everyone who took Darker Than Blue over the top, over our goal last week. I know we can do it again this week. I know we can. We have a $500 goal this hour. There are so many ways to support Darker Than Blue and WPFW. If you're listening right now and you've never donated, now is your moment to step up and support the station that supports you. You can do that by being a sustainer that's doing monthly donations for $10, $20, $5 a month, $15 a month. Less than what you would spend on coffee for a week if you buy coffee every day. You can sustain WPFW's future by becoming a sustainer today. How do you do that? You call WPFW at 202-588-9739 or 800-222-9739. There are real live people waiting right now to take your donation, to talk to you. And when they answer the phone, you tell them you want to be a sustainer for WPFW, either for the next year or until infinity, until you tell us to stop taking the payments. And that means that you can contribute each month the same amount, like clockwork, just like you pay for your Hulu or Netflix subscriptions every month. 5, 10, 7, 15, 20, 25, 30, however much you want to contribute each month to WPFW and to Darker Than Blue to keep us on the air. That's automatically done. You are a sustaining member. We get your support every month. And you can either do it on a year-by-year basis, where if you tell them I want to be a sustainer for a year, then that amount gets taken out over the next 12 months, and then it stops. But if you want to be a sustainer until you tell us to stop, you tell them that too, the nice people at WPFW who are waiting to hear from you, to answer the phone, and they will set you up to do that so that the next time we have a fund drive, you can just listen and say, I am already a sustainer, and I am glad I am, because I love the work that WPFW does, from the music to the public affairs to the community events. I am happy that I am sustaining WPFW. So you can do that right now. If you were a sustainer, if you did donate in the past, and you haven't contributed to this pledge drive, please do that right now. Please renew your sustaining membership. Please become a new member if you are a listener and you have not contributed before, or if you contributed before and you have not contributed to this pledge drive. Please contribute right now. 202 588-9739, 800-222-9739. Phone lines are open. Live people are waiting to hear from you, but you can also, if you are watching on the web, go right over to another tab. Click on another tab, open it, type in WPFWFM.org. Click on the donate button and follow the prompts to make your contribution now. You can also Cash App your donation to WPFW at $WPFWFM. Cash App, it's never been easier to support WPFW through Cash App and via text. You can text the letters WPFWFM to the number 801-801. Follow the link that comes up to donate. Folks, this is your radio station. The shows on this station are listener supported. This station is on the air because it is listener supported. So if you value the information we provide on this station, and particularly in Darker Than Blue, please consider donating today, particularly as we're facing these current events that are very confusing and very concerning to a lot of us. There is no better or more important time to give whatever you are able to keep this show and this station on the air. Don't wait. Do it right now. So I want to start off today. After I started off doing that, I want to start off this show by honoring the great Nina Simone, whose birthday is today. She famously said, quote, "An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times." I think that's true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. As far as I'm concerned, it's their choice, but I choose to reflect the times and situations in which I find myself. That to me is my duty. And at this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, Black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That, to me, is the definition of an artist. End quote. Now, if I didn't tell you who said that, you would have thought that someone today said it. But no, that was the great Nina Simone. But we're also honoring our bright, shining prince, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, who was assassinated on this day in 1965. The great man, known also as Malcolm X, left us endless wisdom, endless. But I think the most prescient of his oratorical and analytical gems are these. Quote, "As long as you think that we should get Mississippi straightened out before we worry about the Congo, you'll never get Mississippi straightened out." He said that during his speech at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City on December 20th, 1964. Malcolm went on to say in that speech, quote, "We have to realize that part of our struggle has in the overall world struggle. We have to realize what part our struggle has in the overall world struggle. Secondly, we need allies. And as long as you or I think that we can only get allies from the Bronx or allies, from up on the Grand Concourse, where you don't live, as long as you and I think that's the only source or area from which I think that's the only source or area from which we can get allies, our source of allies is limited. But when we realize how large this earth is and how many different people there are on it and how close they resemble us, then we turn to them for some sort of help or aid or to form alliances. Then we make a little faster progress. And of course, he said this: if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. So this is why I do Darker Than Blue, dear listeners. It's why I do this show on WPFW. It's why I do History Rewind and other shows on Luke My Nation and Patreon and on YouTube. It's why I talk about foreign policy and domestic and international politics on Black Liberation Media on YouTube, because I know that the newspapers and all U.S. media has much of the U.S. population believing that the oppressors are the criminals, that the oppressed, rather, the people who are oppressed are the criminals, and the actual criminals are the ones being oppressed. That's what we believe, like Brother Malik El-Shabazz told us. And although I don't sing in the shower, I do, but that's not really singing. The gift and talent that I do have, talking and writing, I use it as much as I can to reflect the times we live in and to tell the truth about them like Nina told me to. Now, you may not agree with my opinions about what some of these things mean, but what I do is bring a lot of the history and the hidden details that brought us to this point that you are not told in U.S. corporate media. Whether you agree with the outcome of the response to this information, or not, what I do hope you'll see is that you've been lied to. So you could support deadly U.S. foreign policy that supports fascism and that did not start with whatever current things are going on right now. So let's get into some of that history as I try to get my teleprompter working. Here we go. All right. So let's talk about this situation with this supposed agreement, peace deal that is being negotiated right now between the Trump administration, Russia. I can't say Ukraine because they're not really involved in the negotiations, and the Saudi government. Now, look, I know people don't like it when I say the things that I do about the Democrats. Lately, people have really had a problem with me pointing out how much of what Trump is doing is only possible because Democrats prior to him have put the legislation and the infrastructure in place for him to do the same things that they were doing, that he is now doing, but he's just doing it in a worse, more hateful, more obviously hateful kind of way. Now, Trump may be doing things, like I said, in a racist, brutish, hateful, and seemingly chaotic and fascist way, but the truth is that he didn't have to make up any laws or create any new procedures, mostly to do anything. He is simply using policies and practices that Democrats had already been using, that they had already put in place to do largely the same things that they were just doing in a nicer, more quiet, less public way. So I'm going to do that again today by talking about this recent U.S.-Russia talks and why the way they're reported in corporate media is very messy. And it's lending to me, it's lending more as much confusion about the situation as the corporate media and the politicians created about the situation in the first place. So let's talk about the negotiations so far. Zelensky, of course, is not happy about it because he was not involved in the negotiations up to this point. The Trump administration sent their top diplomats. The Russian government sent their top diplomats to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to sit down and try to work out some type of deal. And of course, Zelensky was not happy about that. And this happened on Tuesday. They met in Riyadh to discuss how to end the Ukraine war and reestablish diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Russia. And this is the first meeting between US and Russian officials since the Russian special military operation in Ukraine that started on February 22nd. Just for full disclosure, I have never and I will never call Russia's response an invasion, because an invasion is a specific thing. When you force your way into somebody else's country and nobody did anything to you and you weren't invited, things were done to Russia that precipitated their response. And we're going to talk about those things again, because we talked about these things all throughout 2022, all throughout 2023, 24, and here we are still having to talk about these things. So I don't have a problem continuing to tell the truth, because that is what I'm doing. All right. So Russia and the United States have agreed to form what they're calling a high-level team to negotiate the settlement of the war. The U.S. was represented by Marco Rubio, little Herman Munster, a national security advisor, Mike Waltz, and special Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, while Russia was represented by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who was accompanied by Moscow's foreign affairs advisor Yuri Yushakov. And let me start right now saying, if I mispronounce anybody's name, please forgive me. It's not intentional. So after the meeting, Rubio tells AP, the Associated Press, that both Russia and the U.S. will form high-level teams delegated with the task of supporting Ukrainian peace talks and all that kind of stuff. Both sides said they would continue talks moving forward, as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was left in the cold. Zelensky has said that he would not accept any deal imposed on his country, which lost, I'm doing air quotes, 20% of its territory to Russia. The talks came a week after U.S. President Donald Trump spoke to Putin. Trump's overture to Putin has upended Washington's policy on Ukraine, and these are the words of Al Jazeera, not me. Ending 3 years of policy focused on isolating Moscow. Now, I got to stop right there, because I am I'm not confused. I say that all the time. That's a phrase I need to stop using, because I'm actually not confused about any of this. I am well aware of what is wrong with all of this. But this thing about 3 years of policy from Washington focused on isolating Moscow. Why is there a U.S. policy of isolating another sovereign country? What business does the U.S. have in deciding for the rest of the world that another country needs to be isolated? And what gives the U.S. government the authority and power to think that it can isolate another country, like literally tell all of the countries in the rest of the world, don't you talk to them, don't you talk to the Russians, or else we're going to sanction you too, because that's exactly what the U.S. does, and that's what they have done. But the U.S. cannot. What authority? Who? And I know U.S. politicians and plenty of Christian nationalists in this country believe that God gave this country the divine authority. It doesn't exist. And I tell you this as a believer in Jesus Christ myself. God did not tell the United States that it was the policeman of the world, that it was the most blessed country on the planet. God doesn't recognize planets or borders or flags or nation states. That's the whole point of the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of the United States. God didn't pick the United States to be his favorite country and to be the country on the earth that carries out his agenda. No such thing. Christian nationalists who tell you this, now they're not just lying because they know they're lying. They're just giving you their alternative facts about what they want their religion to be. That's all that is. So the U.S. has no authority to tell other countries who they can and cannot do business with. They can't tell other countries, we're going to isolate this country here and you can't do business. They do. And some countries are bullied into listening to them, but that is changing. as more and more countries around the world begin to ignore the United States and its diplomatic bullying and does business with whomever they want. This is why Russia was never isolated in regard to this Ukraine war. It was the United States and its European allies in the EU and NATO who were isolated. All right. So just wanted to be clear about what we're talking about, the United States having the ability and the authority to do. Just because you can do something, just because you can bully whole countries, should you? No, you should not. Not if you are an alleged democracy like you claim you are. All right, so let's go on. Then there is the issue of the U.S. and its allies that have imposed sanctions, at least 21,692 sanctions on Russia since 2022. Many U.S. companies pulled out of the country as the Biden administration pushed to isolate Russia globally. In 2022, Russia's gross domestic product dropped by about 2.1%, and this is according to the International Monetary Fund. And I have to say that the sanctioning of other countries that the U.S. does is really evil, and it's very evil in this regard too, because sanctions do not punish the government. Sanctions punish the people of a country. If a sanction is imposed on a government, on a country, and on other countries that want to do business with the targeted country, then those sanctions impact the ability of that country's government to sell its goods, to trade, and to make money to take care of its population. So the U.S. imposes sanctions on countries that it doesn't like with the stated intention of making the economy in that country suffer, so that the people in turn respond by turning on the government that the U.S. government doesn't like. And that is how one of the ways the U.S. government foments coups in other countries. All right. So this situation with Ukraine and Russia and the U.S. it just precipitated by an incredible amount of U.S. arrogance and hubris, because the U.S. pushed Ukraine to be their proxy to attack Russia. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I know you don't believe me. Those of you who are hearing this for the first time, you don't believe me. You think it's Russia. You think Putin woke up one day, flung his legs on the side of the bed and said, you know what? I am going to invade Russia today. Forget them. Forget those Ukrainians. I am going to invade them. That's not what happened. That is not what happened. There are literally decades of U.S. foreign policy and interference in that region and aggression toward Russia that precipitated what happened in 2022. These sanctions, though, are very important because the U.S. imposed these sanctions on Russia after the U.S., the EU, and NATO pushed Ukraine to be their proxy, to attack Russia, by telling Ukraine that if they did it, then they would be allowed into NATO, knowing full well they were never going to allow Ukraine into NATO, which is what Marco Rubio has just said is not going to happen. And then the U.S. sanctions Russia and its people for defending itself against the U.S., EU, NATO proxy attack. That is literally what happened. But American companies lost a lot of money because of all of this too. So a part of this negotiation that Trump has implemented or started with Russia, it does have to do with money. It does have to do with American corporations, I think, does have to do with American corporations saying, okay, look, we've tolerated this Ukraine stuff for long enough, but we have not been able to recoup our losses from having to pull our businesses out of Russia. We are tired of this, in this now. And Trump said, okay, because he wants to make money too. I'm not going to speak on whether Trump has a personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. Like a lot of people want to make it seem like, I don't know. I don't know these men. I don't know. And I don't want to know them. All right. Let's be clear about that. I don't know these men, but I can look at what they do, what they stand for, what they have done, and the policies and what they mean and who would benefit the most from them to get an idea of why they're doing what they're doing. And it's like Trump, I am not entirely sure that Trump and Putin have some weird love affair going on, as some people would like to claim. I think this whole thing really is about money, right? I could be wrong. I could be entirely wrong, but I think it is. But so let's talk about what happened at this summit, at this first meeting. On the day U.S. diplomats were engaged in face-to-face talks with their Russian counterparts, Zelensky lands in Ankara to speak to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And he said the Russian-American meeting, this is Zelensky saying this, the Russian-American meeting in Saudi Arabia came as a surprise to us, just as it did to many others. To be honest, I don't really care. This is what Zelensky said, and he's lying. What matters to me is that our partners take time to think about us, Zelensky said. Oh, please. Referring to Ukraine's concerns about being left out of the talks, Trump said on Tuesday, well, you've been there for 3 years. This is what Trump is saying to Zelensky. You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it. I hate to admit this, but Trump is right on this account, because there were attempts made to reach an agreement to end this war. But the Biden administration scuttled those attempts. I know you don't want to believe me, but it's true. Let's go on. Let me slide down here on my script. At the talks, Russia did not offer concessions because, you know what? If I was Russia, I wouldn't either. And deemed the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine completely unacceptable. There it is. This is why Russia responded the way they did. We're going to get deeper into the details a little bit later, so stick around. But this article from Al Jazeera goes on to say that last week, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that Ukraine's accession into NATO is unrealistic. So it's Rubio who said that Ukraine won't be allowed into NATO. And now the new defense secretary is saying, nope, will not do it. Let's see. Then let's talk about Zelensky's response, though, because I find it interesting, y'all, that Zelensky is mad that he was not included in these talks, and that he has said that he's not going to accept any deal that comes out of these talks that he is not involved in. Well, if that's the case, if that's true, why did Zelensky say not too long ago, just a few months ago, folks, that Ukraine cannot retake Crimea and Donbas, that only diplomatic pressure could force Moscow to withdraw from the territory? He said, Zelensky said in December of 2024, we cannot give up our territories. They're actually not Ukrainian territories anymore, and not because Russia invaded either. The Ukrainian constitution forbids us to do so. De facto, those territories are now controlled by the Russians. To be clear, those territories have always been ethnic Russian, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. We do not have the strength to recover them. This is what Zelensky told the French newspaper La Parisienne last year in December. So let's go on. He said, we can only count on diplomatic pressure from the international community to force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table. Okay, so that's happened now. Putin, or at least his foreign minister, has sat down at the negotiating table with the US diplomats, and Zelensky is mad now because what he said was the only thing that was going to end the war has happened. Now he's mad? What, how, why? This article from 2014, in which, and this is from the Times, which is a UK newspaper, they describe the Russian occupation of the regions in Ukraine like this. They say Russia annexed the Black Sea Peninsula of Crimea in 2014 and controls about 80% of the Donbas, an industrial area that includes the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. It has also seized parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Although it does not control the main cities in either area, the Kremlin says that all 5 regions belong to Russia. Well, they do. Do you know why? Because in 2014, when the US backed a fascist coup in Ukraine, and the people in the eastern region of Ukraine that are in this region, the Donbas, the Donetsk, the Luhansk region, those people are ethnic Russians. When they saw the fascists being legitimized in the government in Kiev, in the police, and in the military, with the support of the United States, when they saw the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was not anti-Russian enough for the United States government. So that's why the US couped him. He was run out of Ukraine by fascists. And the people in the eastern region of Ukraine saw the violence that the fascists unleashed, and they understood that those folks have hated them all this time. Yes, we're going to talk about that too. The people in that region, the ethnic Russian people in the eastern region in Ukraine, and the Donbas and Donetsk and Luhansk and Kherson, and they voted to secede from Ukraine because they did not want to be under the authority of a fully openly fascist government with literal neo-Nazis in it and in the military. That is what happened. The response from the United States was that the Obama administration and Obama himself, on the floor of the House, if I'm remembering correctly, flat out said that the elections in that region, in the eastern region in Ukraine, were illegitimate. Just declared them illegitimate, completely ignored the democratic will of those people to not be governed by neo-Nazis. And then Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, which is where the government is, began an 8-year civil war against those people. So, no, Russia did not annex the Black Sea Peninsula of Crimea. Now we're going to get into some of this history. The new Cold War began almost immediately after the end of the first Cold War. And the reunification of Germany in 1990, then the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. Russia signed off on both of those things. Russia, the Soviet Union, realized, all right, we have lost this. We've lost this skirmish. We have lost this battle in the war against imperialism. They signed off on the reunification of Germany. They signed off on the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. And in exchange, the Western powers said that if Russia agreed to these two things, that NATO would not move any farther east than it already was. Well, then NATO and the US began to renege on every promise that they made to Russia in exchange for them agreeing to these two things, the reunification of Germany in 1990 and the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact in 1991. NATO advanced eastward to Russia's borders after reassuring Gorbachev that it would not unilaterally exploit the country's moment of vulnerability. Again, dear listeners, Russia realized, the Soviet Union realized that, look, we have lost the war. We've lost this Cold War with the West. Let's cut our losses. Let's make a deal with them. Let's agree to let them do what they want to do with Germany, even though this is Germany now. And Russia lost 75 million people to defeating the Nazis. And Russia was opposed to the creation of NATO because NATO included Germany in the alliance. I thought Germany were the enemy. Then why were they allowed to be? These were the questions the Soviet Union was asking when NATO was formed after World War II. After the Soviet Union, the Soviet Red Army defeated Nazi Germany. They turn around after winning the war, and then the US and NATO says, all right, well, we're creating this alliance, this military alliance of European nations, and we're going to let Germany in. And the Soviet Union was actually going to join NATO until they learned that Germany was going to be a part of NATO. And then they said, no, we just lost 75 million of our people to defeating these people. No. So the Soviet Union formed the alternative, their alternative to NATO. Why did the Soviet Union have to form the Warsaw Pact? Because NATO was formed to be aggressive toward the Soviet Union. How else do you explain, dear listeners, that the so-called allies that fought a war against the fascist Nazis in Germany would turn around after defeating them with the leadership of the Soviet Red Army, and then form an international so-called security alliance with your enemy that you just finished a war? And then you are going to tell the people who lost the most of their population to defeating that enemy that they have to be in a mutual international security alliance with the people they just lost 75 million people to. Come on. Would you enter into an alliance with people that you just scrapped with, who drew blood, with the people who just, jumped you, and you had to get all your crew to come and jump them, and you lost most of your crew doing it? And then the people who actually started the fight, they're coming in and saying, okay, well, we're going to have a little alliance, and we're inviting the people that you just had a fight with. What? Come on. So that is why the Soviet Union created, in a very shorthand kind of way, there are a lot more details involved, but that's why the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact as an alternative for itself to NATO, because obviously the Soviet Union did not trust being in a military alliance with Germany. So they felt like they had to protect themselves, not just from Germany still, but from the United States and its European allies that thought it was a good idea to form a military alliance with the genocidal. I hope you understand why why the Warsaw Pact is important. So the Soviet Union, at the start of the Cold War, it's like, fine, we'll dissolve the Warsaw Pact. Okay. If NATO stays where it is, if NATO does not advance its troops and its weapons any closer to our country, you say you're not a threat to us, prove it. Stay where you are. And they didn't. Putin undertook the defense of Syria against the U.S. and the jihadi terrorists that the U.S. funds. And this is much, much later. So this is at the end of 1991. That's how long that has been going on. The U.S. installed Boris Yeltsin as the Russian president. Let me stop here, because you heard that correctly. The United States installed Boris Yeltsin as the Russian president. Now, there's a much longer history backstory to that, and we will get into it one day, but it's insane that this government and anybody in this government calls into question the legitimacy of any other country's elections. When this country's government literally installs leaders in other countries that they approve so that those people can do their bidding. And that's what Boris Yeltsin did in Russia in 1991. People in Russia did not like that man. They didn't want another term of Boris Yeltsin. And what did he do? Why did they hate him? Because he allowed the U.S. to ravage the country. Gorbachev first and then Yeltsin, in a neoliberal free-for-all that enriched Western oligarchs and then created Russian oligarchs. So when people talk about today, Russian oligarchs, Putin is an oligarch, and I'm not saying that he's not, but let's be clear about where Russian oligarchs came from, how they arose. It was from the Cold War. It was from the U.S. Installing Boris Yeltsin as president, and it was from Boris Yeltsin letting the U.S. raid Russia in a neoliberal fire sale. 9 years later, after all of that, Vladimir Putin put the brakes on that, refusing to let the looting continue and refusing to let the new Russian oligarchs run the country. In recent years, Russia reacted to the way that NATO pushed it into a corner surrounded by U.S. military bases and missile installations by installing troops and missiles on its own borders. Because what did the United States do during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Why are people expecting another country to respond to weapons being placed on their border and troops and military exercises being carried out on their border in countries that used to be in a security or military alliance with it? Why do people expect Russia to respond to that type of aggression any differently from the way the United States responded during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Okay. Only have an hour, can only do so much. This is why we do the dark room immediately after this show here on WPFW. So if you are listening on 89.3 and you want to get the rest of this detailed history, go on over to Black Liberation Media on YouTube or on Facebook, or Luke Mon Nation on Facebook, and we'll keep talking about it at 6 p.m. But listen, remember, folks, we are still in pledge drive. And I know we haven't even gotten to everything that we want to talk about in this hour with this potential peace deal, whatever it's going to look like. But this is the kind of information you're not getting on U.S. corporate media. It's not what you're going to get on any other radio station. It's certainly not what you're going to get in U.S. newspapers, because they are all owned by, 6 corporations now? And all of those 6 corporations are owned by individuals who are beholden and supportive of either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but they're all owned by capitalists whose allegiance to a particular narrative about foreign policy and things they profit off of look a certain way. And that way is never the truth. So what I'm telling you right now about the Ukraine war and how it really happened and what went into it and what led up to it, this is real history. These are facts. This is not me projecting my love for Vladimir Putin. This is not me projecting a preference for the Russian government or a particular regard for Russia. No, it's just the truth. And that is what we provide here on Darker Than Blue. And that's what you get here on WPFW 89.3 in the Washington, D.C. area. So if you are listening, even if you don't agree with anything I am saying, now is the time to contribute to keep this show and this station on the air. Because did you know that contending with ideas that you don't agree with, and contending with things, truths that you don't like and that you may not know immediately, did you know that's how you develop critical thinking skills? And this is something that is lacking in a lot of corporate media. It's something that's kind of lacking, I think, in the American general public. And that's why WPFW is so incredibly important. Because you will hear perspectives on this station from different shows that you may not have known. You will hear information that is new to you. You will hear things that you do not agree with, but you hear them. WPFW is not like corporate media in that we give you a narrative that is approved by someone who owns this station, because the people who own this station are you. So you get the gamut of opinion on social and political issues. You get foreign policy, foreign affairs. You get public affairs from perspectives that are way on the left, like mine, and perspectives that are closer to the liberal perspective. You get jazz and you get justice. Now is the time to support the programming that does support you. Call right now, 202-588-9739 or 800-222-9739 to donate. You can also Cash App your donation to $WPFWFM. You can also text your donation to the number 801-801 by texting the letters WPFWFM. And you can go to the website to donate, WPFWFM.org. Click the donate button, make your donation right now. If you are listening and you've never donated before, please become a first-time donator. Please donate for the first time today. We need your support. We have a $500 goal for this show. If you are a sustainer and you have not given to this drive, please give to this drive. And if you have given in the past and you haven't given to this drive, do it now. Don't wait. Do it now. And please become a sustainer. Space your donations out over equal payments over a year so that WPFW and Darker Than Blue gets your support throughout the year. And you don't have to worry about doing another pledge until the next time you want to renew your sustaining membership, or do a sustaining membership that ends only when you call and say, stop taking the payments out. $5 a month, $10 a month, 15, 20, 25, whatever you can do, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Because not only, folks, do you get incredible information about details, about history, about politics, about social movements, about culture, but we also have incredible information on what's going on in the community that you don't hear about, you don't know about from other places. Like this Sunday, the Black Alliance for Peace Mid-Atlantic is hosting a critical film series where they will be showing the movie Soundtrack for a Coup, or Soundtrack for a Coup d'etat. And that's February 23rd from 2 to 6 p.m. at the Mosher Building on the Micah campus. And that is at 81 Mosher Street, Mosher, in Baltimore. Again, that's Sunday, February 23rd from 2 to 6 p.m. Black Alliance for Peace Mid-Atlantic is showing the film Soundtrack for a Coup d'etat on February 23rd from 2 to 6 at the Mosher Building, 81 Mosher Street in Baltimore, Maryland. Is that advertised in the Washington Post? Is the Washington Times telling their people about that information? Are you getting that information from CNN? from MSNBC, from Fox News. No, you're getting that from Darker Than Blue. You're getting that from WPFW. And if you value what we provide you, please call now and support this station and this show. $500 to go still. Still plenty of time with the last 11 minutes I have left. 202-588-9739 or 1-800-222-9739. Please support this station and this show. Let's continue with this analysis of the situation with these peace talks that aren't final yet. They are not final yet. They are going on. So let's continue with Russia and its response to NATO expansion. So NATO has installed troops and missiles in countries that border Russia, that were members of the former Warsaw Pact. So Russia has responded by putting its troops and its weapons and its missiles inside of its own borders, right? So Russia has been protecting itself from the US, the EU, and NATO reneging on its promises, quite literally, to leave them alone. Then in September 2015, Putin undertook the defense of Syria against the United States and the jihadi terrorists that the US funds. That's where the Syria conflict begins. He drew the line in eastern Ukraine and Crimea, where the populations are predominantly Russian speakers. They are ethnic Russian people. They're Russians. And defended Russia's only warm water port at Sevastopol on Crimea's Black Sea coast. So how do you annex something that is yours? The US reacted as though Russia had placed missiles on its Mexican borders. And we get this information not because we're like not because we are clairvoyant or we get this information. WikiLeaks. We got this information from WikiLeaks. Aside from reading newspaper articles about things that go on and doing exactly what I always tell y'all to do, read the whole article, because a little kernel of truth is almost always embedded deeply into an article full of imperialist lies, analyzing the situation, the material conditions, and the political conditions in Russia, and analyzing the material and political conditions in Ukraine and the United States. So analyzing these three factors, these three actors in this conflict, to understand who's doing what, why they're doing it, who benefits from what's being done. And then WikiLeaks provides all of this information, the literal emails from the officials who are planning these things. So we understand that Russia's response in 2022 was not a full-scale, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, which is what you have heard ever since then in U.S. news, in the U.S. media, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News. Whenever they would report on Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, they would always call it an invasion, and they would always say Russia's unprovoked invasion or Russia's unprovoked attack of Ukraine. And it is just a lie that Russia did anything unprovoked. Russia has been provoked by the US and NATO ever since NATO came into existence. The final straw for Russia was NATO and the US and EU putting weapons and troops in Ukraine, which was along the timeline of the 2014 coup in Ukraine. The coup is very important to what is happening with the war and for understanding whatever the agreements will be that come out of this agreement. Because this standoff between the US and NATO forces and the Russian Federation and Ukrainians, including the folks in the eastern portion of the country, that the media calls pro-Russian separatists. They're not pro-Russian separatists. They are ethnic Russians who have been bombarded by a fascist-enabled Ukrainian government since 2015 that has been supported by the United States. So that war didn't evolve organically, but it was the result of conscious decisions on the part of the Biden administration. Less than 2 months after taking office, there were indications from the Biden administration that he was signaling to the Ukrainian government that it would support efforts to reincorporate the eastern regions, Donbas, because remember, I said they voted to separate. And then the Ukrainian government started bombing them. So the people in Donbas had to defend themselves. So yes, they formed militias to defend their people from Ukraine, bombing them with US weapons and support. So this is why we in the Black Alliance for Peace, we anti-imperialists, this is why we internationalists and we Pan-Africanists, this is why we reject this obscurist a narrative and this both sides are to blame position that we've heard from even some leftists about this war. And to be clear, as we're out of time here on Darker Than Blue, this is not a pro-Russia position, but an objective assessment of the dynamics of the situation. This is simply the truth, which is neither pro or anti either side. It is simply what actually happened, that you have either not been told anything about by the corporate media or that you've been completely lied to by the corporate media. And that's why I do what I do here on Darker Than Blue. And that's why we continue to have these conversations on the dark room, which we will, for those of you who are able to. And for those of you who are not, you can catch that on YouTube or on Patreon, patreon.com/LuqManNation, LuqMannation. But that is all the time we have here on Darker Than Blue. An hour is never enough, so we cram as much as I can into it. Please continue to support WPFW. Thank you so much, Craig, in Windsor Mill. Appreciate you. There is still time to contribute. There's still time to call. There's still time to text. There's still time to cash app your support to WPFW and Darker Than Blue. Please do that. Until next week, y'all, a luta continua. The struggle continues. But I promise you, if we keep struggling and if we keep telling the truth, victory is certain. Victoria Acerta. Peace. All right, y'all. I don't have a separate card for y'all because it's just the same thing. There we go. I'm not going to do that. You know what it is. Thank you so much for joining me today. Lord, this week. All right, so I'm gonna try my best to keep up with my notes because I have the teleprompter thing and my notes don't entirely reflect on the teleprompter thing. And then I have another document with my, so there's going to be a lot of weird back and forth and looking in different ways. And I apologize for the confusion, but you know how I do, y'all. It's just, these are conversations we must have because I am not as concerned that people like to disagree just because it seems like they like to disagree with me. I hate it that people don't like the truth. That I just don't understand why people can't be just like, okay, well, I accept that that's what happened, but I don't like it. You know, people have to make an argument about the truth, and I can't live like that. That's I don't know. So let me go on up to the chat, because y'all have been busy in here while I was not paying attention with your side conversations. What's going on, Eric, Chichimacha, Monty Nile, McClubbin, Terry Conley, Sugar Sham, Old Grease, Brandon Beecham, Goddess Crew, Alex, Phil Winter, Winimo Poija, David Silver. What up, David? How are you? Leah Boggs. Hey, Leah. Goddess. Oh, I said that already. Maggie O. Rouse Pasta Sauce. I have some of that. It's my favorite. I love it. Corinna, what's going on, sis? Good to see all of you. Good to see all of you. Let me know. Warren Register, Pamela Jones, Javier Gatica, Ya Oferiwa, and thank you. Yeah, thank you. I saw that. Appreciate you so much. Thank you, John. Natalie H. Let's go down, see who else is in here. Dorian. Latif, what's going on? Good to see you. Always good to see you. Red Sea, peace, Red Sea. Good to see you. I think that's everybody. And if I miss somebody, please forgive me. Oh, Don Hammonds, Uhuru, Comrade Uhuru. Oh, Don, I owe you an email, and I apologize. I totally forgot, but I owe you an email. Mr. Harold Williams Jr., because that's his whole name. That's how you have to pronounce Mr. Harold Williams Jr.'s whole name. There we go. So, all right, let me get into the rest of this thing here. Infinite 8 Flow, what's going on? Brittany Bowman, I'm at the bottom of the list now, so I see the latecomers. Brittany Bowman, Alex Marquez, Cian Chow, what's going on, everybody? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's dig into this. Sorry about that. Got something on my tooth. Now, let's talk about the US, EU, NATO axis of domination. Because here in the Black Alliance for Peace, because now we in BAP territory. Here in the Black Alliance for Peace, we see NATO as a criminal military structure whose only purpose is providing the military material basis for the maintenance and extension of the US, EU, NATO axis of domination, which is white power, basically. As a structure of white colonial power, NATO was essential in supporting colonial powers in Africa. NATO provided the military support to the colonizers because they are colonizers, including to the Portuguese in their military struggles to maintain their colonial holdings in Africa during the initial wave of anti-colonial struggles on the continent. The Obama-Biden administration also used NATO for their attack on Libya in 2011, resulting in the destruction of the most prosperous and revolutionary state on the continent. All peace-loving people, regardless of how you feel about Africa or Russia or Putin all peace-loving people should call for the dismantling of NATO just for that, just for continuing to destabilize the continent of Africa. But there's more. And let me see if I can, hold on. This is bothering me because I have this whole teleprompter thing and it's just not acting the way I want it to. I got to fix it. Okay, gonna go down. Scrolly. Here we go. All right. Go down. US-EU axis of domination. Here we go. So we're looking at now the end result of Ukraine and the US's doctrine of full spectrum dominance. And it's not working out so well for Ukraine, but we always said that it wasn't going to work out for Ukraine. But people didn't listen to us, you see, because people in this country, as much as they hate Russia and communism, and they still believe. I don't know why people are hot in the pants about, you know, their hatred of Russia. Russia isn't communist anymore. Russia's not a communist country anymore. I mean, Vladimir Putin is a capitalist. Vladimir Putin does not like communists. So I don't know what anybody is so pissed off about Russia about. Putin ain't never done shit to you. Putin and Russia have done not a damn thing to you to deserve the amount of hate that comes from especially Negroes. I do not get why y'all, you know why y'all hate Russia so much? Because white people in this country told you to, because the government said so. That's why. Because this same government has used accusing leftists of being influenced and controlled by Russia. Every time we stood up and said, you, United States government, are illegitimate, illegal, and you're oppressing us, the US government's response to that has always been, oh, you're being influenced and controlled by Russia, so we're going to lock you up for being foreign agents. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. The USSR was never communist. It was socialist. Communism is stateless and class. Okay, fine. Wonderful. So the US and Ukraine's collective doctrine of full spectrum dominance is not working out well for Ukraine. And of course, the focus on Ukraine is important, but we have to recognize the bipartisan commitment to the U.S. national security strategy of full spectrum dominance and its utilization of a military first strategy to achieve continued U.S. global dominance. For example, troops that are trained by the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, have been involved in 9 coups. I think there's been more now, 9 coups d'etats in the 13 years that AFRICOM has operated on the continent. And this actually does not include the military responses to the neo-colonial puppet governments that were ousted in the AES countries. That is not including those. This was before those. So unlike a number of peace and anti-war groups that abstract Ukraine from that context, BAP argues that the coup in Ukraine and the attempts to create the conditions for the expansion of NATO into Ukraine has to be seen as not like a separate thing, but as just one aspect of U.S. imperialist strategy, right? It's the concrete material interests of imperialism that drive U.S. policies and is therefore why it must be defined the way we do define it so vigorously, so that we don't isolate these kinds of situations into blaming it on one person like Putin or making a person a savior like Zelensky. And making the situation either better or worse because either Biden is directing the policy or Trump is directing the policy. People didn't have a problem with not having peace talks as long as Biden kept saying that, you know, Russia are the aggressors and Ukraine are the victims. Now Trump comes along and says, hey, why are y'all still doing this? And not because he gives a damn about either one of those countries, but because he just sees this as a distraction from him making more money. So he wants to end ways that that make it hard for him to make money. So we analyzed Ukraine, and we continue to analyze the situation in Ukraine from the perspective of U.S. imperialism and its bipartisan nature. Both parties support full spectrum dominance. Both parties support the US, EU, and NATO axis of domination. Both parties support US militarism and imperialism all over the world. So we believe that for African people, the US, EU, NATO axis of domination represents the greatest threat to peace that exists in the world. So when we are looking at this situation in Ukraine, oh, my computer is doing all kinds of fun things. Let me just go over to here because my computer is not cooperating with me today. So NATO is the biggest impediment, the biggest threat to peace in the world. So we oppose NATO and we analyze U.S. foreign policy through the spectrum of full spectrum dominance and imperialism. So it's absurd for BAP and anti-imperialists, Pan-Africanists. It's absurd to us for any African to embrace the agenda of empire by giving any kind of credence or legitimacy to the crude mobilizations of public opinion, because that's what all the Russiagate bullshit was. All the lies about people being influenced by Russia, conspiring to be agents of Russia, spreading Russian propaganda. No, it's just the truth that U.S. corporate media and every U.S. politician lied to you about, and then turned around and said that we were agents of Russia, Putin's puppets, and all this kind of bullshit. And we even got that from folks on the left, folks like Bill Fletcher Jr. And I'm gonna talk about that mug in a minute. But anyway, let me go on down to the history and the narrative. Ukraine reflects the continuous right-wing nature of European and European American politics. So in 2018, there was an article that was published in The Nation magazine by a guy named Stephen Cohen, who detailed the social and political impacts of the 2014 right-wing coup in Ukraine. So let's get into that. Let me see if this is going to work the way I hope it's going to work. Because like I said, the computer's been acting a whole fool today. And I'm going to try to get this right. There we go. Woo. Because in WPFW, the internet was down. So we just got the internet back up at the studio at WPFW right before I went on Darker Than Blue. I had a little power outage here today. All the stuff had to be redone. Oh, it's been a mess. It's been crazy. But okay. This is this article in The Nation. Let me do my thing so y'all can read along. All right. And this article was published, again, like we said, you can see the date there, May 2nd, 2018, America's collusion with neo-Nazis. Ever since 2022, we have been telling people the U.S. government under the Democrats have willingly entered into this agreement to use Ukraine against Russia. And in order to do it, they legitimized fascists and neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And people kept telling us we were liars. People kept saying that, we're Putin's puppets. People had told me on many occasions, you just don't ever want to criticize Russia. Look, I understand that you have a unique and special regard for the Russian government. All of that shit is bullshit. All I have ever done was tell the truth. All we have ever done was tell the truth about how this shit happened, who did it, and why. And for that, we got pilloried and are still being attacked. The Uhuru movement, that's a part of that. The FBI raiding the Uhuru movement properties and putting them on trial for being for conspiring to be foreign agents for Russia, all a part of this shit. So let's see what Cohen had to say in 2018 about the U.S. America's collusion with neo-Nazis. Stephen F. Cohen, professor emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at NYU and Princeton, and John Batchelor continue their usually weekly discussions of then it was the new U.S.-Russian Cold War. And this was in 2018, so this was before the Russian special military operation into Ukraine. Cohen says the orthodox American political media narrative blames Putin's Russia alone for the new US-Russian Cold War. And let me stop right here and remind you, this is 2018. This was 2 years after the 2016 election where the Russiagate lie came from. It was Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump in 2016 that precipitated her and her campaign coming up with the Russiagate lie to justify her loss to Trump in 2016. The only thing that could explain how and why she lost to that clown was that Russia had to have interfered in US elections for Trump. That's pretty rich coming from the wife of the son of a bitch that installed Boris Yeltsin as president in Russia, that led to the rise of Vladimir Putin. Don't fuck with me. Okay, let me get the rest of this thing. Maintaining this, at most, partial truth, Cohen is saying that the American political media narrative that Putin's Russia is solely to blame for then the Cold War between US and Russia. He said that was at most a partial truth. And he said that involves various mainstream media malpractices, among them lack of historical context, which is why I love history so much, reporting based on unverified facts. If I tell you something and I don't know if it's been verified or not, I'm gonna tell you I don't know if it's been verified. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I heard. We'll see if it's true or not. The media all the time reported a bunch of stuff that wasn't true. Another example of this, the reporting unverified facts, the latest lie that Russia was using North Korean troops in Ukraine. Have you seen pictures of any North Korean troops? You know why you haven't seen pictures of North Korean troops? Yeah. And I understand that you know, this person has been, he is suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. Basically, he has decided that Trump is the devil and that Putin is also the devil. But in 2018, he actually did tell the truth about the Ukraine, about the situation in Ukraine with the U.S. And this is before the war. He is talking about how the United States got involved with the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So, okay, come on, let's go walk through this. He says it involves editorial bias and the excluding, even slurring of proponents of alternative explanatory narratives as Kremlin apologists and carriers of Russian propaganda. Again, I understand that what this man is saying today is different from what he said then, but in 2018, this is what he said. All right. An extraordinary example appeared on May 1st when Jim Sciutto, CNN's leading purveyor of Russiagate allegations, that guy, I don't even think he's at CNN anymore, tweeted that, quote, Jill Stein is repeating Russian talking points on its interference in the 2016 election and on U.S. foreign policy, end quote. To the extent that Sciutto represents CNN, as he does almost nightly on air, it is useful to know what this influential network actually thinks about a legitimate third party, an American electoral democracy, and its presidential candidate, and also about many well-informed Americans who have not supported Stein or her party, but who strongly disagree with CNN's orthodox positions on Russiagate and U.S. foreign policy. No less important, however, is the highly sensitive nature of the mainstream narrative of the new Cold War, what it chooses to feature and what it virtually omits. Among the omissions, few realities are more important than the role played by neo-fascist forces in US-backed Kiev-governed Ukraine since 2014. There's the point. I don't care what this man says today. Don't care. I don't care what he says today about Trump and Putin. I don't care, because this is what he said in 2018. Not even many Americans who follow international news know the following. For example, let's go on and look at what he actually exposes. Let me go into the comments. I said I was going to try to be better at this because you all do ask questions that I want to answer, but you know, I get so into talking about the things that I forget to turn around and talk to you. So let me do that. Let me take a few minutes and see what y'all are saying. Yes, what's his face? He's going back to saying Trump and Putin are buddies. Yep, yeah, he has. But he can't do anything about this. He can't do anything about what he wrote in 2018. So it is what it is. Let's see. No, haven't seen, not because they're too busy winning, because they're not there. They're not there. There are no North Korea. There is one grainy video that claims to show North Korean troops, but you can't tell. You can't tell anything on it's a mess. Of course, South Korean media would regurgitate the North Korean troops in Ukraine line, despite South Korea providing Ukraine with more shells indirectly via the US than all the shells provided by Europe. And why? As Jaxie accurately pointed out, would South Korea repeat this lie? Because South Korea is the ass buddy of the United States. And South Korea is waiting for the United States to use it to destroy North Korea. Okay, let's go down. Let's see. Okay, so here's a good question. So am I understanding correctly that Russiagate, Trump and Russia collaboration, was fake, but Russian interference in the 2020 election was not necessarily made up by Clinton? No, they're both lies. They are both lies. There was no Russian. Tell me how Russia interfered in the 2016 election. When voting systems in this country are not connected on one network. There's not one uniform process that every state follows to count its ballots, not even to carry out elections. Right? Because some places don't have the same amount. You know how this election system in this country is. How? This is something that people have never been able to understand. How did Russia interfere in the US elections in 2016 and force Hillary Clinton to lose and Donald Trump to win? How? Tell me how. All anybody has ever been able to say is that Russia paid for some propaganda on social media networks, and then that was even debunked. But people still repeat this lie that Russia interfered in US elections. But the very same people refuse to admit, now I'm going to have to get there, the very same people refuse to admit that, what year was it? 1991, 1991, 1995. I can't remember the year. But again, this dude, Bill Clinton, sent a team to manage the re-election campaign of Boris Yeltsin. So when I said earlier from the Al Jazeera article that the U.S. installed Boris Yeltsin in Russia, in the presidency in Russia, that's when it happened. Because Boris Yeltsin had served one term. Boris was an alcoholic and he was a mess, and he just got worse and worse and worse. And he carried on Gorbachev's opening up of Russia to U.S. corporations and capitalists. And Russians did not want him as president anymore. They were not going to vote for him. You know who was going to win? I had it at one point. Now I'm going to have to find it and put it in the description for the show. A communist was going to win the election. So look, I'm not going to argue about what another country is or is not. If people say USSR was never communist, okay. But the Communist Party is the largest political party in Russia. And the people who ran Russia back in the day called themselves communists. Yes, they had a socialist system, but they called themselves, okay. So the Communist Party was about to win the election in Russia because people did not want Boris Yeltsin again. And the United States was like, we cannot have Russia going back to communism or socialism or whatever it is you think it was. We can't let the communists win in Russia because anti-communism is the second official religion of the United States. White nationalism is the first one, or settler colonialism, if you want to, if you will. Right? So what had happened was Bill Clinton said that Boris Yeltsin has to be reelected in Russia because he is allowing us to do what we want. So we have to make sure he gets reelected. So he sent a team of people to manage the campaign of Boris Yeltsin. They did an incredible amount of psychotic propaganda against the communists. And you want to talk about an illegitimate election? Do you know how big Russia is? We're going to talk about that in a minute too. But do you think that the United States government would send an entire team to manage the campaign of someone who they wanted to make sure would defeat the communist candidate and not fuck with their elections to make sure it worked? Oh. So anytime anybody in this country talks about anybody else's elections being illegitimate, I always tell them the story of how Bill Clinton got Boris Yeltsin reelected in Russia and how Boris Yeltsin's tenure when he won reelection, the people hated him so much more because Yeltsin attacked his own parliament with tanks. And he was so hated that he had to step down. He couldn't even complete his term. You know who he appointed to finish out his term? You know who he called on to finish out his term? Guess. I want you to guess. I'm going to give you time to do it. And you only get one. There you go. Anybody complaining about Vladimir Putin is evil, Vladimir Putin is this, Putin's war, Putin's invasion, Putin's this, Putin came from the United States. Putin was possible. Putin was made possible by U.S. interference in Russian elections. John is absolutely right. Putin was in the KGB and former director of the FSB. Yeltsin wanted to pick his successor. He picked Putin. And it was Vladimir Putin that finished the term, the reelected term of Vladimir Putin, of Boris Yeltsin after the US helped get him reelected. Now, Putin did not win his reelection that year, that immediate following year. He came back and ran and was elected by the people of Russia. So listen, all these people want to doubt that people in Russia vote. and I've gotten this from more than one person. I was doing an event at church one day, and they were talking about the Ukraine war, and this was a couple of years ago. This was, I think, in 2023. And we got college professors at my church, and the black pettit bourgeoisie, a bunch of Howard University professors, and they're very proud of that. It's fine, it's okay, it's cool. But whenever I talk about foreign policy, they always give me the side eye, like, what does this uneducated little negress know? And that situation happened in this event at my church. And somebody said, when I brought up this situation with the US interfering in Russian elections, leading to the elevation of Vladimir Putin, I was told, well, that he wasn't elected, he was installed. I'm like, no, he was elected. They don't have elections in Russia. How do you know they don't have this? This is what I don't understand. This is what I don't get about however people feel about other countries that the US says are its enemies. Not every other country, right? Because people don't seem to have a problem. People don't seem to have a problem believing in elections in France, believing in elections in Germany, believing in elections, that they're valid in Mexico, but Venezuela, Russia, Cuba, every African country. I don't understand how people who don't know anything about other countries are so sure that people in other countries don't hold elections. I've never been able to understand how people can make that leap. Because if I tell you that the US government interfered in the elections of another country, obviously they have elections. For the United States to interfere in them. So I'm not sure what people are arguing about when they're talking about, oh, they don't have elections in Russia. Obviously they do. The United States just stole one and created Vladimir Putin. Anyway, okay. So what does Cohen say about what people don't know? Let's dig into this. First, that the snipers who killed scores of protesters and policemen on Kiev's Maidan Square in February 2014, thereby triggering a democratic revolution that overthrew the elected president Viktor Yanukovych and brought to power a virulent anti-Russian pro-American regime. It was neither democratic nor a revolution, but a violent coup unfolding in the streets with high-level support were sent not by Yanukovych, because people were saying that Yanukovych, his forces were the snipers. That has never been true. These snipers were not sent by Yanukovych, as is still widely reported as of 2018, but instead, almost certainly, by the neo-fascist organization Right Sector and its co-conspirators. As a matter of fact, when this happened, when the Russian special military operation in Ukraine happened, By Any Means Necessary was on the air on Sputnik Radio in DC. And we talked about all of this, me and Sean, every freaking day for 2 weeks practically. And so this is a refresher for me, and I hope it's new information that helps you. So Cohen goes on to say that the pogrom-like burning to death, I know you didn't know this, the pogrom-like burning to death of ethnic Russians and others in Odessa shortly later in 2014 reawakened memories of Nazi extermination squads in Ukraine during World War II, has been all but deleted from the American mainstream narrative, even though it remains a painful and revelatory experience for many Ukrainians. So what happened is that after the 2014 coup, leftists started being attacked. Leftist people, organizations were attacked. by these right-wing forces that had been legitimized in Ukraine. And one of the attacks occurred in Odessa at the Trade Union House, where the fascists, the neo-Nazis, ran progressives and leftists into the Trade Union House building, set it on fire, burned people alive. And people who escaped or who were trying to escape by jumping out of windows, they were beaten to death when they hit the ground by the neo-Nazis. No US media outlet reported that since 2022, since the special military operation that Russia implemented in 2022. As a matter of fact, all of this information about the neo-Nazis, the fascists, the right wing, all of this information, it stopped being reported by every US media outlet since 2022. And then people started saying, what Nazis in Ukraine? There are no Nazis in Ukraine. Up to 2018, most major media outlets in this country did report that Ukraine has a Nazi problem. That is literally, I can't remember the publication, but that was literally the title of an article published in a major publication in this country talking about the legitimization of neo-Nazi fascist forces in Ukraine, in politics, in the government, in the military, in the police, and the violence they were carrying out. All right. So up to 2018, it was common knowledge in the US media sphere and in the European media that that Ukraine has a Nazi problem. When Russia responded to the US, EU, NATO aggression using Ukraine against it, all of that information disappeared, stopped being reported. And then you had journalists, talking heads on TV, and politicians saying there is no Nazi problem in Ukraine. There are no Nazis in Ukraine. What Nazis? Why are you worried about Nazis in Ukraine? Why are you worried about Nazis in Ukraine when Putin has just invaded Ukraine? All right, let's go. Let me get through this. That the Azov Battalion, some 3,000 well-armed fighters, which has played a major combat role in the Ukrainian civil war and now is an official component of Kiev's armed forces, is avowedly partially pro-Nazi, as evidenced by its regalia, slogans, and programmatic statements, and well documented as such by several international monitoring organizations. Congressional legislation recently banned Azov from receiving any U.S. military aid, but it is likely to obtain some of the new weapons recently sent to Kiev by the Trump administration due to the country's rampant network of corruption and black markets. That stormtroop-like assaults on gays, Jews, elderly ethnic Russians, and other impure citizens are widespread throughout Kiev-ruled Ukraine, along with torchlight marches reminiscent of those that eventually inflamed Germany in the late 1920s and 1930s, and that the police and official legal authorities do virtually nothing to prevent these neo-fascist acts or to prosecute them. On the contrary, Kiev has officially encouraged them by systematically rehabilitating and even memorializing Ukrainian collaborators with Nazi German extermination pogroms and their leaders during World War II, renaming streets in their honor, building monuments to them, rewriting history to glorify them, and more. Stepan Bandera is the main one they are talking about. Or that Israel's official annual report on anti-Semitism around the world in 2017 concluded that such incidents had doubled in Ukraine, and the number surpassed the tally for all the incidents reported throughout the entire region combined by the region The report meant the total in all of Eastern Europe and all former territories of the Soviet Union. Oh, that's the only decent thing I think I can tolerate being said about Israel and any of their reporting. They even admitted in 2017 that there was more anti-Semitic violence in Ukraine than all of Eastern Europe and the former territories of the Soviet Union. These are the people that John McCain went to Ukraine to meet with, shake hands with, take pictures with, do a speech on the stage at a rally with. Yeah. And offering U.S. support to. These are the people that Victoria Nuland went to Ukraine and visited and gave them cookies to. She did. I'm not kidding. Yeah. These are the people that Barack Obama said were rightfully attacking pro-Russian separatists in the eastern region of Ukraine. Right? So when Obama said that the elections that the ethnic Russian people in the eastern region carried out, the referendums they carried out where they voted to secede from Ukraine, Obama decided that those elections were invalid. And then when Kiev started bombing the shit out of those people, and the Azov Battalion goes in and they're leading, they're literally the tip of the spear for the civil war that Kiev carried out against the ethnic. Obama didn't say anything about the Nazis. The first Black president that must have loved all Black people, as somebody just told me the other day. Obama did care about us, and Kamala Harris did care about us. You leftists don't, leftists just, you just want perfect. No, I don't want perfect. I just don't want fucking genocidaires. That's all. I don't want any more imperialists. No more imperialism. But Obama didn't say anything. The first Black president didn't say anything about the neo-Nazis that he and his administration, which included Joe Biden, remember he was the vice president, legitimized in Ukraine. No. Mm-mm. So this is the reality of what Ukraine was like in 2018. This is what the coup in 2014 created, or didn't create, but facilitated. The coup in 2014 legitimized these people, put them in the government in Kiev, gave them a freedom to be in the military and to be openly fascist, and put them in the front of the military to attack the ethnic Russians who just seceded so that they wouldn't have to deal with the fucking fascists for 8 years. For 8 years. How long was Barack Obama president? That whole thing went on 8 years, the entirety of Obama's presidency. And he didn't say shit about the Nazis. He didn't say shit about the civil war that Kiev carried out against the ethnic Russian people. He never acknowledged that the people in the eastern region of Ukraine are, in fact, ethnic Russian. Never acknowledged that those people had a legitimate concern for their own safety and existence because of the legitimization of the fascists in the Kiev government. That only happened with the support of the US government under Barack Obama and Joe Biden. All right, so that is the way that Ukraine continues to reflect the right-wing nature of Europe and European American politics. And this is the nature of the government in Ukraine right now, that the Biden administration gave all that money and all those weapons to, right along with the corporate press that kept lying about the the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And let me drop this article in the chat for you so you can read it for yourself. There you go. And there is a lot more information that is really not discussed at all about this whole conflict. A lot of people talk about that, you know, both sides are responsible. No, the full responsibility for this war, this crisis, had its genesis in illegal policies of the US, EU, NATO axis of domination, beginning, like we just said, in 2015. And BAP, just to be clear, reported then that it was clear from statements attributed to Obama officials at that time that during the latter part of 2013 until 2014, the Obama administration gave material support and encouragement to anti-democratic right-wing elements in Ukraine to execute regime change. Therefore, the US was deeply implicated in the coup of February 4, 2014 in Ukraine that overthrew the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. The coup government, infected with Ukrainian ultra-nationalists and with political ties to literal fascists like Right Sector and the Azov Battalions. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this was our analysis then. The coup plunged Ukraine into crisis because substantial sectors of Ukrainian society didn't support it. They had just voted for Viktor Yanukovych. They wanted normalized relations with Russia. They did not want, most people in Ukraine did not want to isolate Russia from themselves. They did not want to really get involved with being influenced by US and Western policy. That's why they voted for Viktor Yanukovych. So they didn't want this coup. They didn't want a pro-US, anti-Russia president. That is just the truth. Especially the predominantly Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens in the eastern part of the country. Those Ukrainian citizens, the ethnic Russians in Donbas, and they rejected the coup, the legitimacy of the coup, and began to voice support for independence from the neo-Nazi government that took power. The response from the illegal coup regime was to label its own citizens terrorists and attack the eastern portions of the country militarily. In other words, they attacked their own citizens, the Ukrainians did, in Kiev, a crime that the Obama administration pretended was the excuse for US subversion in Syria. The Azov Battalion played a major role in the attacks by the coup government against Ukrainian citizens opposed to the coup. And then there are the Minsk agreements. After suffering military defeats at the hands of the people in eastern Ukraine that had subsequently declared themselves independent of the coup government, because that's the other thing that they don't tell you in the US press about the Civil War. Those ethnic Russians in the eastern region, they didn't take that shit lying down. Like I said earlier, they formed militias. And they did get support from Russia because they're ethnic Russians. What Russia didn't do immediately was to respond militarily, because Russia knew that the coup in 2014 was facilitated by the US. And they understood that if they got involved in that situation in Ukraine, they would be getting involved with the US and NATO, and they didn't want to. Because look at what the US and NATO had done all this time. Couldn't trust them. So what Russia did was to provide military support, and they did send some soldiers, a very small contingent, into the eastern region of Ukraine where their people lived. They were all ethnic Russian people. So those folks who seceded from now fascist Kiev got weapons and training and assistance from Russia, and they kicked Kiev's ass. That's why the civil war lasted 8 years and not like 3, because the ethnic Russian people in the eastern region in Ukraine fought back, and they fought back very, very well. That's another reason why this talk about Russia annexing Crimea and the separatists, the pro-Russian separatists, and Russia is occupying illegal territory, that all of that is a lie. All of it is a lie. All of it. Russia can't illegally occupy territory that doesn't actually belong to Ukraine anymore, especially when the people said they don't want to be a part of Ukraine and they want to rejoin the Russian Federation. Okay. So let's go on. Let's move on. Let me try to stay on track. You know I have a hard time doing that. So after suffering military defeats at the hands of the peoples in eastern Ukraine that had subsequently declared themselves independent of the coup government in Kiev, an agreement between Donbas and the coup government was arrived at that became known as the Minsk II agreement. Terms of the agreement included a commitment to a ceasefire, along with relative autonomy for Donbas, eastern Ukraine. The agreement avoided all-out war and provided a degree of stability until the Biden administration came back into power. What happened then? Well, let me go down. Hold on. Let me get down here. Back in power, the Biden administration and the Democrats, who at that time in 2018 reclaimed the mantle of the party of war, began to encourage Ukraine authorities to ignore the Minsk II agreement and to forcefully retake control of Donbas. Biden did that. Even more dangerously, the US and some European powers began to indicate that Ukraine might be invited to become a member of NATO. They had just facilitated the legitimization of neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and then there are some people in the fucking Biden administration talking about, hey, maybe they can join NATO. Because, you know, look at what the United States and NATO did to the Nazis after World War II. A lot of them came to work in the government in this country and in Europe. If Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, this could allow a nuclear-armed NATO to be positioned right on the borders of Russia. This is Russia's great and legitimate security concern. Russia is rightly concerned about this security risk at its border. All right. So then a couple of years ago, not too long ago, the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, the former President of France, which one was it? Was it Sarkozy? I can't remember which one it was. Yeah, I'm having a serious memory problem because I got too much going on. They recently admitted that they never intended to adhere to the Minsk II agreements that they all signed. The leaders of Belarus, Russia, Germany, France, and Ukraine all signed the Minsk II agreement. The only people who were serious about it, about signing it and adhering to it, were apparently Russia, because everybody else reneged on the deal. And the former prime minister or former chancellor of Germany and the former president of France came out and admitted that they never intended to adhere to the agreement. They only signed it to give Ukraine time to amass enough weapons to attack Russia for NATO. That is really the truth. I know people don't want to hear it. I know people think that I am unfairly biased toward Russia. I know some people must think that I have a crush on Vladimir Putin. But None of that has anything to do with anything. Not only is it not true, but even if it were true, it still wouldn't have anything to do with anything, because what I'm telling you is just literally the truth. It's not stuff I'm making up in my head. So, for the Black Alliance for Peace and our analysis of this situation from beginning to end, and there's so much more in this, I can't, we don't have that much time to go into everything. The question that needed to be answered, asked really and answered, is like, what is the Black radical position on Ukraine then? So our position has been from the beginning that NATO is an illegitimate, aggressive structure in the service of Western imperialism and does not deserve any support from African, Black, and colonized people. And all social forces committed to peace should demand that NATO be dismantled. We still believe that. That is absolutely true. In 2018, we said the Ukrainian crisis is yet another example of the delusional policies. I'm sorry, not 2018. This was 2023. This was from an article that we put together in 2023 as a response to the Ukraine war. And it's a part of a huge resource page on Ukraine, which of course I'm going to give you. So we said then the Ukrainian crisis is yet another example of the delusional policies being pursued by US rulers unable to accept the changed circumstances in the world today that limit their ability to impose their interests on peoples and nations without consequences. As an African people involved in an existential battle in the US against rightist forces, from the Trump Republican support to the warmongering neoliberal Democrats, with both committed to global full spectrum dominance or white power, it would be an affront to our history and people to enter the struggle on the side of empire and NATO. And we put this statement out in all of these resources because obviously we were doing a lot of interviews and people were asking us a lot of questions about what does this mean? Why is this happening? What is going on? Is this true? What does this mean to Africa? And because there were leftists, even Black leftists of some renowned reputation, who not only came out supporting the imperialist position and actions in this conflict, but who also slandered the fuck out of us. You had Bill Fletcher Jr. on the Real News Network talking about how we socialists who are saying that this wasn't Russia's fault are silly, immature children who think that Putin is going to put on his cape with a big S on it and will re-implement socialism. That's what Bill Fletcher Jr. said about people, leftists, who were telling the truth about everything I just said to you about that conflict. Bill Fletcher Jr. on the Real News Network. That's why I'm not on the Real News Network anymore, by the way. Yeah. Okay. So let's get down to brass tacks. And also, and it wasn't just Black leftists. It was also white so-called leftists, because then there was Howie Hawkins coming out with his Ukraine Solidarity Network demanding reparations for the fucking Ukrainians. Woo, getting angry all over again. Okay. So here, let's get down to some brass tacks here. Is telling this truth equivalent to supporting or having a partial or particular regard or partiality or a particular regard for Russia? No, it doesn't. Telling the truth should be its own obvious driver of behavior, as telling the truth is generally supposed to be a good thing, but not where foreign policy in the US is concerned. My good friend, our good friend, Erica Ryan, said in this chat the other day on the Remix Morning Show that nobody in the US is required to know anything about the rest of the world, while other people around the world know all about the US. largely because of this government's interference in their countries. And you know what? She's right. She is absolutely right. Because the really bad thing is that people have very strong and unshakable opinions about countries that they don't know anything about, and they will get into arguments with you about other countries, and they don't know what they're talking about. And they will turn the truth that you're telling them into an accusation against you that you're a supporter of Putin, that you're partial to, or you're having special regard for Putin or the Russian government. These are things that people have told me personally. Or they'll just flat out insult you and call you a Russian agent, or, as a friend of a Facebook friend called me over several posts a few years ago, a Russian pig. Yes, somebody on Facebook who is a friend of mine, one of their Facebook friends, repeatedly, every time I commented on this woman's post, this person came in and called me a Russian pig over and over. And then I had to cuss my friend out because I was like, so you gonna let this man talk to me like this? You don't have to agree with a word I say, but if you're my friend, you would never let anybody disrespect me in that way, even if you think I'm wrong as two left shoes. And she didn't see it that way. So we ain't friends no more. That's how I roll. Always have. And at 57, I always will. So this name calling and stupid intellectual deflections, they're going to keep happening. They will continue to happen. And I'm just going to be fine with that, because the truth is what it is. The truth is what it is. And I'm not going to not tell the truth just because people in this country are too comfortable with US politicians and the media and their lies about other countries. And honestly, a lot of people are too lazy to do any reading on issues themselves. None of that means that people who tell the truth that they don't want to know are liars or agents or uncritically biased toward the entity the truth is being told about. But that's how it's received these days when on this issue. And I've had a lot of these conversations about this issue and Syria and plenty of domestic issues with too many people who call themselves left since 2022. And yeah, I'm sick to death. I am just, oh my God, I've had it with the lack of knowledge that people have about basic information about these issues that people have really strong opinions on that they're pulling out of their ass, really, and out of, mainstream corporate media that's telling a bunch of lies. So I know I'm going to have to keep hearing these things, but every time I have one of those conversations, I am compelled to gather facts for whatever claims were raised this time. And yep, I've done it again because I told you that's what I do. It's just what I do. Now I've had 3 conversations about this potential peace deal this week. 3. I literally talked to 3 people for maybe a total of 6-7 hours since Wednesday. And one person just kept calling like, okay, I know you said blah, 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 but what about blah, blah, blah? And look, if you're going to call me and ask me, all right, cool. Yeah, we can talk about it. Yeah. And I don't mind if you don't agree with me. That's okay. But don't accuse me of things that you know damn well aren't true, and stop pretending that you know things that you don't, just because you want them to be true and you don't like a particular individual, right? So here we go. I will never claim that Vladimir Putin is a nice guy. I never have. I actually don't say anything like that about any political leader, even the ones that I've met. I mean, because they're people just like everybody else. Why should I make a declaration about this individual, Vladimir Putin, just because he's the president? Please, I don't know that man. I don't know whether he's a nice guy or not. I don't think of him in the context of whether he is a nice individual or not, but in the context of what policies come out of his government and how those policies affect us and working class and poor people around the world. So while I stand by everything I have said, and I always will. And I will continue to say and stand by everything I say about Russia being the victim in this Ukraine war, and Putin being punished for literally protecting NATO and their fascist proxy, protecting Russia from NATO and their fascist proxy Ukraine. And really, what Putin is really being punished for is shutting off the spigot in Russia for the United States. That's why he's being punished. Knowing all of that, I know also that Russia is not a socialist utopia, right? That Putin is not going to put on a cape with a big S on it and re-implement socialism. So let me just say that, yes, it's true that Russia's policies and societal attitudes toward homosexuality and transgender people are generally restrictive and discriminatory. Absolutely true. There is the gay propaganda law that was passed in 2013 in Russia that bans the promotion of non-traditional sexual relationships to minors. That is what the law says. It's not that the law bans gay media, gay posters, propaganda. It says it bans the promotion of non-traditional sexual relationships to minors. Now, look, I'm just telling you what it says. How it's implemented, I'm sure it's just blanket all over the place. But that's what the law says, okay? I'm just acknowledging that this is fucked up. There are no comprehensive anti-discrimination laws protecting LGBTQ plus people in employment, housing, public service. There just aren't in Russia. They don't recognize same-sex marriage. The Constitution in Russia was amended in 2020 to explicitly define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Transgender people face significant legal and social challenges. While you can challenge legal gender markers in Russia, technically, but the process is really cumbersome, requires medical certification, a whole bunch of stuff that a lot of people have a difficult time accessing. The process is intentionally onerous. And transgender people face a lot of discrimination and violence in Russia. Absolutely true. There is a lot of stigma and discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals in Russia. Homophobia, transphobia are widespread, and the culture in some of the areas in Russia are conservative. Their religious values are conservative, and the government rhetoric reflects this conservatism. It's true, absolutely true. There are few public support systems for organizations or LGBTQ individuals in Russia. And the Russian government has a propensity to label advocacy groups that emerge in Russia for LGBTQ plus people as foreign agents, right? So yeah, Russia is not a friendly place for LGBTQ plus people. It is hostile to LGBTQ plus people. In recent years, there have been reports of increased crackdowns on LGBTQ activists and organizations in Russia. The government has also targeted online content related to LGBTQ plus issues. And by the way, I'm not making this up either. I didn't come up with this. You know where this came from? This came from DeepSeek. Yes, the Chinese AI. Yeah. So I am absolutely not sitting here saying that Russia is a utopia in any way at all. Absolutely. Russia's policies and social attitudes toward homosexuality and transgender people are hostile. There are significant legal and social barriers to equality and acceptance of LGBTQ plus individuals in Russia. Absolutely true. And I have never denied that that is a serious problem in Russia. But what does any of that have to do with what the US did to Ukraine to attack Russia? Did the US do all of this? Did the US use Ukraine to attack Russia because it was protecting LGBTQ plus people in Russia? Fuck no. No, they did not. So while this is true about Russia as an internal contradiction, it's a huge one. This internal contradiction in Russia has absolutely no bearing on what the US, EU, and NATO did to Russia using Ukraine. Then there are other issues that people have raised, like the lack of ethnic diversity in Russia, or the belief that Russia is a racist nation or a white nationalist nation. More than one person has said that to me this week. So again, this is from DeepSeek. Excuse me. Russia is a multi-ethnic country with a diverse population. And I looked this up in DeepSeek, by the way, because I did not know all of this information. I had an idea about the anti-LGBTQ plus laws and actions, but I didn't know the details. So I looked it up on DeepSeek. And people have said to me this week about it, look, Putin. Somebody told me Putin is a white nationalist. So, I mean, somebody said, how can Russia complain about Nazis in Ukraine when Putin himself? Somebody said that Putin was a Nazi. Somebody said Russia is full of Nazis. I was told that Russia is a white nationalist nation. So I'm like, okay, let me see what the ethnic makeup of Russia really is, and what relationship Africans have to Russia today. So I asked DeepSeek, and DeepSeek said Russia is a multi-ethnic country with a diverse population. According to the most recent data from the 2021 Russian census, the ethnic demographics of Russia are as follows. It's a lot. It's a lot. There is a list of 20 different ethnic groups in Russia. 20, and it's actually more than that, because number 20 on the list of ethnic groups is other ethnic groups, and that includes three named ethnic groups that make up about 0.3% of the population, and then they say and many others. So I don't know if anybody knows how many ethnic groups there are in Russia. But a DeepSeek does, and I see what's going on over here in the chat, and I'm going to ignore that comment because I'm trying to be a better person. I really am. Okay, so let's just skim this list really quick. The ethnic groups in Russia make up Russians, which is the largest ethnic group. That's about 80% of the population. But then there are is this pronounced Tatars or Tatars? I'm not sure. But anyway, they are the second largest ethnic group, comprising about 3.9% of the population. This is interesting. I did not realize this. This is very interesting. Ukrainians, approximately 1.4% of the population. Bashkirs, about 1.2% of the population. Chuvash, 1%. Chechens, 1%. Armenians, 0.9%. Avars, 0.8%. Mordvins, I don't know what, 0.8%. They go to Kazakhs, Azerbaijanis, Darjans, Admurts, Mari, Ossetians, Belarusians, Kabardians, Kumis, Yakuts or Saka, and then there's the other ethnic groups. So there is that's the ethnic makeup of Russia. DeepSeek says it's important to note that these figures are approximate and can vary slightly depending on the source and the methodology used in the census. Additionally, the ethnic composition can change over time due to factors such as migration, birth rates, and assimilation. Russia's ethnic diversity, DeepSeek goes on to say, is reflected in its federal structure, which includes numerous republics and autonomous regions that are home to various ethnic groups. These regions often have their own official languages and cultural institutions, contributing to the rich cultural tapestry of the country. I'm going to read that again. Russia's ethnic diversity is reflected in its federal structure, which includes numerous republics and autonomous regions. Look it up. Look up what autonomous regions means. That are home to various ethnic groups. These regions often have their own official languages and cultural institutions, contributing to the rich cultural tapestry of the country. DeepSeek goes on to say that Russia is a transcontinental country, meaning Russia is freaking huge. Meaning Russia spans more than one continent. Geographically, Russia is located in both Europe and Asia. So when people say Russians are European, that's not true. They're actually more Asian than they are. So making it the largest country in the world by land area. The Ural Mountains and the Ural River and the Caucasus Mountains are generally considered the dividing lines between European and Asian parts of Russia. Things that are important to know about European Russia: the portion of Russia west of the Ural Mountains is considered part of Europe. The region includes major cities like Moscow, the capital, and St. Petersburg. Despite being smaller in area compared to the Asian part, European Russia is home to the majority of Russia's population, about 75 to 80%. I'm going to stop right there. The reason people hyper-focus on Russia being so white is because most of the white population lives in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Most of the people who live in other regions of the country, like DeepSeek said at the paragraph at the top, live in regions, a lot of them are autonomous. That they are controlled by the population of that region. So people saying that Russia is white nationalist, that they're racist, that it's a white country, are saying that because in US media, whenever they show Moscow or St. Petersburg, all you see is white people. That's why people think that. That's largely why. And it's the way we look at the dynamics of every other country. It's why when I went to Cuba for the first time, I was shocked that when I got off the airplane, everybody in the airport was Black, right? Because all I knew about Cuba up to this point, up to the point where I went to Cuba for the first time in 2022, all I knew about Cuba was what I saw on US news and in US media. And every single picture and video that was shown to us about Cuba here showed white people. All of the Cubans in Miami is white. And I know that was grammatically incorrect. I'm making a point. All them Cubans in Miami is white. And then I learned why. All the Cubans in Miami is white. But that is why the Eurocentric focus on how this country reports on other countries with the intention or for the purpose of making sure or trying to make sure that we Africans in this part of the diaspora have no idea that our cousins are in those countries. And they were fighting the same battles that we were fighting here against colonialism, slavery, against white supremacy, against it, right? So when I went to Cuba in 2022 and I got off that plane, I'm like, the hell? How come all my cousins work in the airport? right? So that's where that belief about Russia comes from. Okay. Then there's Asian Russia. Oops. The portion of Russia east of the Ural Mountains is considered part of Asia. This vast region includes Siberia, the Russian Far East, and parts of the Caucasus. Asian Russia is sparsely populated, but rich in natural resources like oil, gas, and minerals. You do know why. This is also why the US wants to get rid of Putin and to put a US puppet back in power in Russia, because the US wants access to those natural resources, and Putin is not going to give them access. Putin turned off the spigot. Okay? The cultural and historical identity in Russia or of Russia, there is a European influence that we see. Russia's historical, cultural, and political development has been heavily influenced by Europe. For example, its language, Russian, religion, primarily Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Orthodox Christianity is very conservative. Most Orthodox Christian sects, denominations, sects, S-E-C-T-S, I always have to do that. Orthodox Christianity is conservative, and that's just true. And historical ties to Eastern powers have shaped its identity. But the Asian influence is also evident in Russia. Russia has significant cultural and historic ties to Asia, particularly through its interactions with Central Asian, Siberian, and East Asian peoples. Regions like Tatarstan, Buryatia, and the Russian Far East reflect these influences. Then, there's the economic and political ties. Russia is a member of several European organizations like the Council of Europe and has historically been involved in European politics. However, it also plays a significant role in Asian geopolitics, particularly through organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its relationships with China, India, and Central Asian countries. We go down, go down, go down. So I really wanted to focus on not necessarily how important Russia's diversity is, but that's a part of it. But I really want us to understand that we don't understand Russia. We do not. We understand Russia from the perspective of US imperialism and what this government has told us about Russia all this time. And when you consider that this government has never, ever, since it actually happened, admitted that it was the Soviet Red Army that defeated the Nazis, this government and its allies have been lying about Russia as a threat to the West ever since. Ever since. Okay, so I did want to look up what white nationalism means, because I think we kind of use that term to generally mean racism, but it means a specific thing, right? So white nationalism includes racial supremacy, yes, because white nationalists believe in the superiority of the white race, though this belief can vary in intensity. Some may advocate for racial segregation and be happy with that, like, the white folks did in this country in the Jim Crow South, and, during slavery and now, rather than outright supremacy. But also, white nationalism includes the establishment of an ethno-state. The ultimate goal for many white nationalists is the creation of a nation state that is exclusively or predominantly white, where non-white populations are either excluded or significantly marginalized. Then there is the cultural preservation of whiteness. White nationalists often emphasize the preservation of what they perceive as white culture, traditions, and heritage, which they believe are under threat from multiculturalism and immigration. A common stance among white nationalists is strong opposition to immigration, particularly from non-white countries, which they view as a threat to the racial and cultural integrity of the nation. Xenophobia and racism, conspiracy theories are involved in it. All of this. White nationalism has roots in various historical movements and ideologies, including colonialism and imperialism, which is the expansion of European powers, often involved in the subjugation and exploitation of non-white populations. Eugenics, the early 20th century eugenics movement, which sought to improve the genetic quality of the human population through selective breeding, and often had racist undertones, segregation and apartheid. Policies of racial segregation, such as those in the United States. This is from DeepSeek. I didn't say it. The Chinese did. DeepSeek said this. Policies of racial segregation, such as those in the United States and South Africa, were based on maintaining white dominance. And fascism. The ideology of white nationalism shares some similarities with fascist movements, particularly in its emphasis on racial purity and authoritarian governance. So that's the basic understanding of what white nationalism is, what it means, how it manifests itself, and what its goals and aims are. So when people have said to me this week that they believe that Russia or Putin himself or all of Russia are white nationalists, are white supremacists, are racists, I kind of had to look up what these words mean to really have a solid answer. Because when I said on the Remix Morning Show that Russia has been involved in supporting African liberation struggles against colonialism, and if they had not provided that support along with Cuba, then those African nations may not have won some of those struggles. And people took exception to that, and I get that, because I don't have anything to quantify that opinion with. So that's not something I should have said, because I don't know that the African nations would not have won those struggles had they not received support from Russia. What I do know is that in Angola and Mozambique, Cuba sent all of their military, everything. They sent every piece of military equipment they had, and all their soldiers, anybody and everybody who would go to help Mozambique and Angola defeat the colonialists. So in that way, I don't think Russia did sent that much support, but they did support anti-colonial struggles, and that support was needed to win those battles. I shouldn't have said that African nations might not have won had Russia not provided the support, because I don't know if that's true, right? And that's cool. I'm cool with being corrected like that. That was absolutely a correct correction. Because when you're doing analysis, you have to be careful that you're not making a personal opinion instead of analysis. And that was an opinion. So I apologize for that. But when I was thinking about it, I kind of thought, because somebody else in the chat put in how much, thousands of people go to Russia for school, particularly medical school, every year, and have been for decades. And I didn't know this. So I had to look it up. So I looked it up, and this is not from DeepSeek, by the way. This is from some other sources that I'm going to share with you, because I want you to see this too. And I want you to understand why. Where is here we go. All right, here's the first one. I want you to understand why I believe, or why I do not believe or agree with the idea that Russia is white nationalist, or even that they're necessarily white supremacists. Not that they're racist, sure, but let me tell you why. Let me share this article. All right, this is the first article that I just happened to come up with when I was looking up, Africans in Russia, African involvement in Russia, Africa. I think I literally put in the phrase Russia, African and racism, Africa and racism. And I got a bunch of articles, and this was one. Russia's growing footprint on the African health landscape. Health cooperation with Uganda highlights Africa's role in Russian foreign policy and Ugandan moves in a changed world. Now, I have not done any analysis on the government of Uganda and what the political orientation of these people are, whether they are strictly capitalist. I know that Uganda's president had close ties with the US government at one point. There's been a pivot toward Russia. I don't know what that looks like now. I'm just saying this is just the information I found. And this article is from September 4th of last year, 2024. Go through it real quick. In recent years, Russia's role in Africa has involved more engagement and expansion of its diplomatic reach. That trajectory contrasts with the adversarial relations between Russia and Western countries, heightened by its invasions of Crimea in 2014 and Ukraine in 2022. We just talked about those are not invasions. So again, let me point out, this is not an article that is friendly to Russia. This is not a Russian publication. This is not an anti-imperialist publication. This is not an anti-capitalist publication. All right. This is a typical corporate capitalist, imperialist supporting program publication. They are not saying nice things about Russia just because, that. Okay. So, sorry about that. There we go. Let's go down here. African countries are increasingly sympathetic toward Russia. For example, a sizable number of them abstained or were absent from the UN vote to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The intensifying relations between Russia and African countries include increased cooperation on health issues. At the forefront of that development is the health collaboration underway between Uganda and Russia. Although focused on biosecurity challenges exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the bilateral health activities reveal Ugandan and Russian interests that extend beyond the health sector to include economic efforts and touch on regional leadership in Africa and global competition among the great powers. I hate that phrase so much, but okay. Ugandan-Russian health cooperation provides a lens on how global health is changing in the post-pandemic geopolitical world. I'm going to drop this in the chat so you can read it. So Russia is in a partnership with Uganda to improve Uganda's health services, but also to have input from Uganda on how they can improve theirs. This is one reason why I have a hard time believing that Russia is a white nationalist country, because if you're developing an ethno-state, if your goal is to build an ethno-state, why would you want a bunch of Africans involved in your ethno-state? And while, okay, I get it, they don't have to be involved. They could be just helping you improve your infrastructure and whatever for your ethno-state. But there is a long history of Africans going to Russia to train to be doctors and for other kinds of training on Russia's dime. There really is. So I found this article too. I'm gonna share it. Okie dokie. Let me make sure I increase the magnification so you can see it right away. And I'm going to share this article with you. There you are. As Russia, and this is reported by the Washington Post. The very people who have been spreading all of the Russiagate lies. So they are not biased toward Russia. Okay, so but this article is in the Washington Post. As Russia seeks influence in Africa, former students play a central role. Going back to the days of the Cold War, thousands of African students studied in the Soviet Union and later Russia. They are now among Russia's biggest boosters. Cannot make this stuff up. This article is published just last month, January 9, 2025. The article states that in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, the young Africans, a young West African student touched down in what was then the Soviet Union, knowing only a handful of Russian words and little about their new home. Decades later, those former students, many who became doctors, engineers, and business people in West Africa after studying in Russia, are key influences for Russia as it vies with the West for sway in this turbulent part of Africa. Anyway, in the West, they never talk about why the region is turbulent. But anyway, okay. In interviews in Burkina Faso, which has become a focus of Russian outreach, the former students said they are fostering economic, educational, and diplomatic ties as they help their country move away from generations of working with the West and toward partnering with Russia. One of the students says, "We studied there and we know the potential," said Christian Oedreogo, hope I got that right, who arrived in the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and now leads a Russian Burkinabe business club. I'm not celebrating business clubs, y'all. I'm not celebrating capitalism. I'm just showing you that Africans not only live in Russia, Africans have not only studied in Russia for decades. The Soviet Union has paid for African students to come and study there and take that knowledge back to their countries. The Soviet Union, Russia now is strengthening its ties with African nations after all those decades of helping African people. So are they a white nationalist country? I don't see it. Not from this. So this person, a Christian, who is one of these professionals who was trained in Russia for free, he said, "We want to play our part to sit down at the negotiating table and accompany authorities so that this partnership is win-win and enables real growth for our nations." The article goes on to say that, where are you? Where'd it go? I lost my place again. Sorry, y'all. There you are. The Biden administration has been frustrated as junta officials, in Burkina Faso, the AES leadership, that's who they're talking about, and its neighbors have embraced warm relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Interviews with former students in Burkina Faso underscored the breadth of ties with Russia, which extend beyond the security cooperation that is often the focus of Western officials. This is a picture of the person who was just quoted. Close that. This is Christian Oedreogo, who studied in the Soviet Union and now leads a Russian Burkinabe business club in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. All right, so let me go find the next place in my notes that I had highlighted. He is a part of a delegation. Let me scroll down here. I got two mouses working. Ouagadougou was part of a delegation that met with Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré at a Russia-Africa summit in Russia. He also launched an economics club focused on cooperation between the two countries and assisted in organizing a trip to Moscow for dozens of Burkinabe business people. Other former students have helped establish clubs dedicated to Russian language and culture. We know Russia well, the language and the mentality. Scroll. And this is from someone named Daouda Diane, who studied hydrologic engineering in Russia and now leads a club of former students. So we are well placed to explain to many Burkinabes who are not familiar with it, we are the bridge. So the article, as you can see, goes on to talk about Russian soft power, where they explain how during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had far less than the West to offer in developmental aid. So one of the main ways the Soviets gained influence, okay, if that's what you want to call it, was through grants for students, said Ulf Leising, the Mali-based head of the Sahel program at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. You're just going to have to look up that dude's name. From the 1960s through the 1990s, thousands of students from Burkina Faso, which was known as Upper Volta until 1984, studied in the Soviet Union and later Russia before returning home. Across West Africa, including in Mali, former students have acted as mediators between Russia and their nations, Leising said, and with Russia's military capabilities dealt a blow by the toppling of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, Leising added its soft power efforts, including ramping back up scholarships and language programs, could become even more important to Putin as he pursues global influence. Now, you notice how in this country, even when they tell the truth, even when the media tells the truth about another country involving in diplomatic relations with another country, they always have to frame it as some nefarious thing, like Russia is peddling influence. Like, no, they're just engaging in the kind of international cooperation that other countries in the world want to engage in. Now, does this mean that Russia isn't getting any benefit from doing this? Of course they are. They're not doing it just out of the kindness of their hearts now. The man that was quoted before said, this can be a win-win situation. It can be a win situation for the people of Burkina Faso and Uganda and Mali, and it can be a win situation for the people in Russia. It can be a win for the governments of the AES. It can be a win for the government of Russia. Yeah, it's a mutually beneficial thing, and that's okay. Countries, sovereign nations, countries and people with the right to self-determination have the right to enter into any kind of agreement with other people that they want to, for whatever reason they want to, if it's going to be beneficial to them and they're going to help other people. Let people live. I mean, like literally, the United States government needs to let people live, because that is what they are doing here. But of course, the Washington Post has to frame it as it's something nefarious. I mean, okay, if you're not trusting any selfless, I never said it was selfless, though. I literally just said they didn't do it out of the kindness of their heart. I literally said it's a win-win situation for both. It's mutually beneficial. Literally just said it. I did not say this was selfless. Okay. All right. So let's finish up with this article. Then they say, there's been a massive knowledge gap to overcome, the former students said. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the number of foreign students studying in Russia dwindled, and Russia closed its embassy in Burkina Faso, largely turning inward. Why? You have to ask yourself why. What happened to Russia after the Cold War so that they had to do those things? We have to look at what happened to Russia economically under the collapse of the Soviet Union. That explains why they closed their embassy and why the number of students in Russia dwindled, because they literally could not afford to pay for students to come and study in Russia anymore, because the collapse of the Soviet Union was largely economic. Okay, so this is another student from West Africa. Stop that, computer. Who is back in her country, Clarisse Poda, who studied in the Soviet Union in her early 20s and now is a gynecologist in Burkina Faso. The article goes on to say, Tatiana Gontram, a Russian woman who married a Burkinabe man in 1995 and then joined him in Burkina Faso, said that for years after she arrived, there was next to no awareness of Russia. Once, she said with a laugh, she told the Burkinabe man that she was from Russia, and he asked her where in the United States that was. So, Russia hasn't always been involved in and deeply involved in relations with Africans, but that has been a part of the evolution of the history of Russia, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So, let's see. Clarice Poda, the lady whose picture you just saw. Let me go back to the article here and scroll down. Clarice Poda, who studied medicine in the Soviet Union and is now a gynecologist in Burkina Faso, said she and other students who studied in Russia face stigma on returning home, sometimes, for instance, being scoffed at by doctors who had studied in France or elsewhere in the West. These bougie ass imperialist people were actually shitting on these folks who got a free medical education in Russia and brought it back to Africa to help to help African people. And these bougie ass people who went to the colonizers and their schools to be taught medicine look down upon the people who went to Russia to learn the same thing. Amazing. Imperialism is wild. She said, Clarice Poda said, Russia has always been relegated to a second position, but it is now that the paradigm is changing. There is a real opening. Let's see, there is so much more in this article, but I think you're going to read it. I think you're just going to have to read it yourself for the sake of time. But I just wanted to highlight this article a little bit so you could see that Africans being in Russia, and I didn't even know this to this extent, Africa being in Russia, being involved in Russia, Russia's involvement with Africa and Africans, it is not limited to Russia's support of African liberation struggles. As you can see, Russia has literally paid for African students to come to Russia to learn all kinds of things on scholarships and grants and just, on Russia's dime. And I guess, I don't know if it's like Cuba's Elon program where Cuba says, you don't have to pay us anything, just promise to go back to your countries and your communities and practice this medicine the way we taught you in your communities. And tell them about Cuba. Tell them that we are their friends, right? I don't know the details of Russia's medical student program, but I do know that where is that thing? Where is the thing where the person was there as far back? There it is. Let me go up to on a recent day in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, businessman Boriema Sangare was sitting at his desk, taking a call in rapid fire Russian about sesame that he was helping Burkinabe farmers export to Russia. On his desk was a bottle of organic Russian fertilizer that he hoped farmers would soon use. Sangare studied in Russia for 9 years, starting in 1974. He said that he faced far less racism there in Russia than in France, which was Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler, and that he thought Russians, unlike the French, were able to see Burkinabes as equal partners. In 2023, he led a delegation of Burkinabe businessmen at a Moscow economic fair, which he said marked the beginning of what they hope will be flourishing business ties. It has changed a lot, and it has changed fast, Sangare said of the connection between the two countries. He credited Burkina Faso's president, who has been a staunch proponent of working with Russia. So you have that article in the chat for you to read. And I really just hope that you see that the relationship that Russia has with Africa goes beyond a surface level. We're just being nice to the blacks so we can look good around the world. No, and this does not mean that Putin isn't the literal devil. He could be, for all I know. But what I do know is that none of that, whether people think Putin is racist, whether people think he is a white supremacist, whether people think Russia is a white nationalist country, whether people think that Russians hate Africans because they are racist, whether people think that there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine because the US media told you there weren't any after the US media reported that there were plenty, a lot, so many that there were a problem. Well, whatever people want to believe about Ukraine and Russia, and that, it doesn't have any bearing. It doesn't have any bearing whatsoever on the facts about what led up to the Ukraine war with Russia, the US, EU, NATO proxy war using Ukraine against Russia, and it has no bearing whatsoever on Russia's legitimate response to everything I just told you. And if you, let me give you this BAP resource, because that's the thing I forgot to do. Read everything, read it all. And I don't care if you agree with it. I don't care if you continue to disagree with me. Y'all are still in there in the chat talking about, I don't like Putin. He's an oligarch. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care that he's an oligarch. So that didn't have anything to do with what was done to Russia in everything I told you. Him being an oligarch doesn't have anything to do with the US government fucking with Russia the way they have. Nothing. This is what I want people to understand. When we tell these truths about what the US government does to other countries, when we say this other country did not do the things that the US government said, what actually happened was the US government did these things, propped up these evil people in these countries to oppose this government, and the US has been lying to you about what they have done. So, of course, everything they're saying to you is the leader in this other country that is the devil that we want to get rid of, we being the US government. We're going to blame everything on them. We're going to make them the devil in your eyes, so that when we foment a coup, when we legitimize violence against actual real grassroots opposition to the fascist forces that the US props up, when the US backs civil wars against those forces in those countries, repression, when the US backs the state consolidation of media, the state closing, legally banning opposition political parties, closing opposition political parties and opposition organizations or offices, seizing their properties and throwing their leaders and members in jail. Ukraine did that. Ukraine did that under the Biden administration. And you want to talk about oligarchs? Did you know that Ukraine was implicated in the Panama Papers as one of the most, if not the most corrupt country on the planet? Guess whose name was in that report, the Panama Papers? Volodymyr Zelensky. So if we want to talk about oligarchs, I mean, two can play that game. People were like, oh, I don't see how Putin can talk about a couple of people told me this week. I don't see how can he talk about Nazis in Ukraine? This is actually one of my cousins. How he gonna talk about some damn Nazis in Ukraine? He a whole Nazi himself. What is your evidence for that? What is your evidence for that? But okay, two can play at that game. People don't like Putin because he's an oligarch. Zelensky is an oligarch. Zelensky is an oligarch cokehead that's been sniffing up all the money. That is also an opinion. I'm not sure that man's on coke, but Marion Barry was my mayor, so I know a coke addict when I see one. All that sweat under them lights. It's not the lights. He ain't that hot. You can't tell, please. Nobody is mad. See, nobody is mad that you hate Putin. I don't care that you hate Putin, because your hatred of Putin has nothing to do with this situation in Ukraine involving Russia and what brought it about. Your hatred of Putin means nothing in the context of the facts of how this situation was created, who did what and why. Keep hating Putin. Neither I nor he cares. Doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about here. Nothing. But it is weird, though. It is kind of weird that people will die on the hill of hating Putin for whatever reason, but they still won't say shit about the oligarchs and the fascists and the racists and the settler colonists in the US government. And that's in the Democratic Party, because you can talk about Trump being a fascist all you want to, but it was Obama and Biden and McCain and Victoria Nuland and Jake Sullivan who knowingly legitimized neo-Nazis in Ukraine to unleash them on Russia. Doesn't that make them fascists too? When you make deals and alliances and you make plans with fascists to do stuff that's mutual beneficial to the both of you, yeah, you're a fascist too. You want to talk about oligarchs? How much money has the Pentagon lost? Can't find, can't account for. Nobody says anything. Do any of the CEOs of the defense contractors step in and say, now, wait a minute. Now, how are you losing all this money from all of this material that we put? Who has stepped in and said to any of these corporations, y'all can't keep dictating domestic policy in this country? The entire government in this country is run by oligarchs, and Walmart oligarchs, and Amazon oligarchs, and the media. Are you kidding me? So listen, like I said, these weird responses to just stating facts, as you can see, will continue to happen. That will keep happening because people, I do believe, just really prefer to believe imperialist lies because it is easier. It's easier to just believe the lie that they're telling you about why they are taking your tax dollars and bombing the fuck out of people who ain't done shit to you. But that's okay as long as your eggs are cheap enough, as long as your gas is cheap enough, right? You don't care what this government does to other people around the world as long as you are not personally convenienced. So as long as the government is lying to you about what it is doing in other countries and blaming other countries for, you don't care. So of course, there are people who will watch this whole, what I've been doing, the 2-3 hours now. There are people who will watch this whole 3-hour show and still come away with Putin did this. This is his fault. And you are a Putin. You are a puppet of Putin. You are not paying any attention to the facts, which means that people have willingly refused to apply critical thinking. People have willingly refused to say, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Well, that kind of changes the way I kind of look at that, because I didn't realize that happened. I didn't realize the US government did that. I didn't realize that happened in Ukraine. I didn't realize the Ukrainian government started bombing their own people and the US helped. I didn't realize there was a brutal massacre of ethnic Russians, leftists and progressives. And people don't do that because they do not want to. And here I am guessing, because I'm not in people's head, but I am kind of guessing that I think people just don't like it. It is the cognitive dissonance, right? It's when your strongly held beliefs are challenged and you are presented with new information, and these beliefs that you have, they're a part of you. They're a part of your identity. They are so strong that when somebody comes and says, hey, did you know that that's actually not true? This is really what happened. you will not only refuse to accept the facts, the truth, but you will demonize the person who's telling you. Not new, seen it before, and I'll keep saying it. It's always, it's gonna happen. I just, you know, I just want people to understand why I analyze the situation between Ukraine and Russia the way I do, not because of my personal opinions about shit other than imperialism. All I'm doing is telling you the facts, exactly what happened, exactly what happened. And for that, what we have gotten since 2022, actually, tell you the truth, what we've gotten since 2016, since Russiagate became the lie, became the Democrat Party platform lie. What we've gotten since then for telling the truth has been repression from the government, that a lot of folks who are holding on to these strongly held beliefs about how they feel about Putin ain't said shit about. That's what pisses me off. Now, you want to know what pisses me off about people feeling the way they do about Russia and Putin, despite the facts in this particular situation? It's that your personal beliefs about Putin have kept you from recognizing the injustice that was committed by this government against leftists in this country since 2016, when the Democratic Party came up with the Russiagate lie. You all helped them do it with your silence. Because I have not seen the kind of resistance to information when we talked about the Uhuru 3 being accused of being Russian agents. Nobody, I didn't see this kind of vitriol when folks were coming after us. I didn't see any kind of vitriol like this when Biden, when Jake Sullivan lied about African Stream, just flat out lied. African Stream is a Russian propaganda outlet. Fucking lie. But what happened? Every social media outlet in this country and many in Europe deplatformed African Stream. And that just happened last year. So look, I just want to make it really, really clear, really, really very clear. I am never not going to tell the truth about US imperialism, not ever. I am never not going to tell the truth. If that seems like, if when I do that, it seems to you like I am being unreasonably supportive of a particular leader, go ahead, feel the way you feel about it. I don't know what you want me to say, because I'm just telling you the truth. You feel however you want to feel about it. The truth remains what it is. And that's really all I'm interested in. So that's all I got for tonight, y'all. Let me go back up and check out some of these comments before I go get some dinner and a very stiff drink. Oh, this is pretty interesting. Nope. I don't consider Democracy Now! A credible source, because Democracy Now! Went all in on imperialism over Ukraine. And there had been some indications in some other instances of foreign policy where Democracy Now! Towed the imperialist line. So no, there are certain issues. I actually don't listen to Democracy Now! Anymore because of the way they absolutely went all in on the US's lies about this Ukraine conflict. I don't think they are a reputable source anymore. I mean, imperialism has to be the line. I don't know. Well, I would have thought imperialism was a line, but apparently imperialism is not the line. But neither is genocide. So I don't know what the fuck y'all's line is. Imperialism is my line. Your line? I don't know what it is. Okay. So, all righty. Well, this is true. And this is why when I do present information, I actually use the sources that I know lie. Because like I always say, I say this all the time, Read the articles in these publications. Yeah, read the Washington Post, read the New York Times, read the Atlantic, read the LA Times, read these newspapers, read the whole article, and go back in the archives and see how they reported on the African struggles against colonialism, to understand the context of why they report things the way they do today, and to get a little bit more truth about what really happened. So yeah, when I do provide information, when I look for information, when I'm researching something, when I'm looking for information to share with people, I don't just use left sources. No, I love it when I find the truth in the Washington Post. I love it when I find the truth in the New York Times. It might be 15 paragraphs down, but it's in there. So yeah, I use sources that are not left sources. I use sources that are imperialist sources, like I just did. Okay, let me see if you guys have any more questions. I think this is true. I think this is true. And I think for me, Leah says that people just want to have something to say, and I get it, but sometimes you have to stop yourself from saying a thing. And this is something that I take upon myself, because the truth is that this is difficult to do all the time, because you do open yourself up to a whole lot of criticism that if you had just not said anything, wouldn't nobody be given to you. You know what I mean? It would be great. I would love it. I would love to go back to not. Well, no, that's not true. I actually would not love to go back to not knowing what I know. What I would love is to go back to people not fucking with me. That's what I would love to go back to. I would love to go back to that period of time when, I was just expressing my opinions to my husband, on Sunday morning when we were watching our political shows, and nobody was calling me a puppet of some leader that they hate, or saying that I was unintelligent. You don't know what you're talking about, or calling me a Russian pig. I would love to be able to express this information and not be attacked. I'm not sure if people think that we organizers have Teflon skin. I don't know if you think we take a special protein mix so that we're just like, oh, all the attacks off us. But I'm sorry, we are human too. Being threatened, having your job threatened because you expressed an opinion that is opposite of what the State Department has said. You think we just kind of laugh at that? Like, oh, it ain't no big deal. Well, like, man, I'm not sure what people think we organizers experience when we are treated like shit by people who don't agree with us. I do not know what y'all think that does. It makes us angry as hell, mad as hell, because a lot of the attacks are personal, and they don't need to be. But that's a social media thing. That's an anonymous poster thing. That's bullies, anonymous bullies with keyboards kind of thing. But there's also the kind of people who attack you because you are telling the truth. But in the attack, they are propping up the very entity that we are trying to tell you is trying to kill your ass too. And that is wild. So I don't have any more comments. And like Leah said, I am having to teach myself. I'm really having to teach myself not to say a thing. When I see people like today, that was the first time, I think, in a couple of weeks, because I'm trying to resist the urge to respond every time somebody says some slick stuff to me when I'm just telling the truth. So that's it. All I have is the truth. That is it. That's all I have. That is all I am ever going to tell anybody. People will ask me what I think something means, and I'll tell you, and I'll gladly tell you. I could be wrong. I might be wrong. And if I am, I'm happy to admit that I was wrong. And you've seen me do it. But that's not enough for people. And it's nothing we do is ever going to be enough for people who do not want to challenge this imperialist system. That really is the basis of it. And there's no need me talking it to death to make it anything other than what it is. So that is the marathon show for today, because I had to get this out. I had to deal with this because this peace deal is going on and people are freaking out about it. And they're saying they're repeating all of the lies from 2022 about what happened, why Ukraine happened, why Russia responded, what happened in Ukraine in 2014. So I felt like we really needed to deal with that and tell the truth so that people could understand that this peace deal that is happening could have happened 3 years ago. Could have happened. Almost did. But the Biden administration said, nope, no peace in Ukraine. We are not done with them using them against Russia. So when Trump said to Zelensky, well, you've been there for 3 years. You could have ended it. He was right. And I'm not saying Trump was right because I support Trump. I am saying Trump was right because it is the truth. That's it. That's it. So what's going to happen from this peace deal? Who knows? I don't know. What I do believe is going to happen. Now, here's an analysis that is based not on fact, just what I, just analyzing what I just told you. Crimea, the Black Sea region, Donbas, Donetsk, Luhansk, Sevastopol, Zaporizhia, they are Russian territories. They will remain Russian territories because those people are ethnic Russian people. They voted to secede from Ukraine. They don't want to be a part of Ukraine anymore. If anybody tries to make them go back to being Ukraine, those militias will take up arms again. Trump doesn't want that. He wants to make money. He wants to be nice to Putin so that Putin can give him access, maybe he's thinking, to some of those resources. I'm not so sure Putin is going to do that. So I'm not so sure this peace is going to last if they actually come to a peace deal because, Trump is a greedy motherfucker. And if he is talking about annexing Greenland, why do we think he's not going to turn right around and then fuck with Russia when Putin says, no, I don't want BlackRock over here. No, Vanguard cannot come over here. And no, your mining companies cannot come over here and drill on the Siberian plains. No. I mean, considering all of the actors involved, who knows how this is ultimately going to turn out. That's kind of how I think things are going to go. But again, could be wrong. Happy to admit, if I am wrong, that I'm wrong when it all shakes out. But I'm clear on how this got started, who started it, when, why, and what we should really be focused on now, and that is imperialism. That is U.S. imperialism under both parties. So, all right, that's it. That's all I got to say. I'll see y'all. What is today? I don't even know what today is. Friday? Yeah, I'll see y'all Wednesday, I believe. There will be some more content on Patreon for this week's History Rewind. I'll be talking a little bit more about the Freedmen's Bureau, I believe. I'll be talking a little bit more about public transportation segregation in the District of Columbia before Jim Crow was established. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, so I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Appreciate you very much. Be really good to each other. Be really good to yourselves. Peace.